Shalom, everybody. Welcome back to the Matan Torah by the Baal HaSulam with commentary by Rebbe Avraham Morechai Gottlieb. We are in Ha'arvut, section 19, a little bit above the middle of page 108. The header reads, although the guarantee initially includes only the nation of Israel, ultimately each individual in the world is responsible for the whole world, because we are quantumly, consciously integrated as one body, one man with one soul. And that includes all people, because everyone is Tzelem Elokim, Jew and non-Jew alike. Of course, everybody has different roles, and so we'll see here and clarify more so the role of the Jewish people. The Baal HaSulam begins. Rebbe Elazar, the son of Rebbe Shimon Bar Yochai, took the concept of the guarantee to an even greater extreme. He states that not only all of Israel are guarantors for one another, but that the whole world takes part in the guarantee. Actually, there's no dispute here. For all agree that to begin with, that is only as a start in the rectification of the world, a single nation is sufficient to make a foundation for the Torah. It was impossible to begin with all the nations at once. And so the sages said in Avodah Zarah 2b, in the Masechet of the Talmud, that the Holy One went from one nation to another with the Torah, but they did not want to receive it. That is, they were immersed above their noses in the contamination of self-love, some with adultery, some with robbery and murder and the like, to the extent that it was inconceivable at the time to ask them if they agreed to abstain from self-love. Therefore, God did not find any nation qualified to receive the Torah other than the children of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. For the refinement of their forefathers stood by them. The commentator adds, in terms of the refinement, he says the Hebrew expression used by Baal HaSulam is zechut avotam, which is often translated as the merit of their forefathers. But zechut can also mean refinement. And that seems to be the intended meaning here. As we've mentioned before, in Ot Aleph of the Baticha l'Chochmat Kabbalah by the Baal HaSulam, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Creator, wanted to give Klal Yisrael lots of Torah and mitzvot in order to give them zchut, merit. But zchut comes from the language of hizdachut, refinement, because the greatest refinement we can ask for is the merit. The greatest merit we can ask for is the refinement. It's through the refinement of this ego, of this will to receive for oneself alone, into more giving, that we come closer to the Creator. And closest in characteristic is similarity of form, which is the spiritual principle that brings us to Dveikus. The closer we are to Him in character, the closer we are to Him. Period. So because of this zechut, because of this refinement of our forefathers, or at least the forefathers at the time of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, they were able to receive the Torah come the time of Matan Torah. As our sages said, quote, the forefathers observed the whole Torah even before it was given, as said in Masechet Brachot 2b of the Talmud. That is, because of the loftiness of their souls, they had the ability to perceive and acquire all the ways of God, which constitute the spirituality of the Torah that stems from attachment, being devekut, to God. It's an amazing thing to contemplate, to marvel at the idea that the grandeur of the souls back then, of our forefathers, that they were so spiritually in tune that they could understand and see spiritual reality for what it was, and be able to draw it into physical reality because they saw the principles. So they knew, despite not having a Torah and despite not having an explicit law, whether oral or written, what was kosher and what wasn't, what was permissible and what wasn't, so on and so forth. Of course, we see exceptions in terms of things that didn't work out relative to the way the Torah prescribes. For example, Yaakov having 2 wives, both being sisters, which was not what the Torah allows. But there's explanations for all of these things at the deepest of levels. I don't wish to go into it now, but Baruch Hashem, thank goodness, thank God that our Masorah, our tradition, is of the deepest magnitude, and we have the zchut, we have the ability and the merit to refine ourselves through it. Just as our forefathers did, and as we also have the ability to do today, thanks to their merit. The Baal HaSulam continues, this they achieved without first ascending the ladder of practicing the deeds of the Torah, for they had no possibility of fulfilling them at all, as stated in the giving of the Torah. The Rebbe Shita says on the spot, they had no possibility of fulfilling the practice of the Torah because they were few. That was the last point that we left on the prior essay of Matan Torah, the giving of the Torah, that it could not have happened without the entire nation agreeing to it, and a mutual guarantee in the arvut. Because they were few, there was no capacity to fulfill these mitzvot. On a micro level, yes, but what the Creator desires of us and how it is to manifest, of us being the example for the world, being the Jewish people, we need a whole nation for that. And we'll continue to get into that shortly. The Baal HaSulam continues, undoubtedly, both the physical refining and the spiritual exaltedness of our holy ancestors greatly influenced their children and their children's children. The refinements remain with those of that generation that received the Torah, whose every member took upon himself or herself that sublime spiritual work, as each and every one stated wholeheartedly, Naseh v'nishma, we will do and we will hear. And this is the reason we were chosen, out of necessity, to be a treasured people from among all the nations. Hence, only the members of the Israeli nation were admitted into the required guarantee, and not the nations of the world at all. Because they did not take part in it, this is the plain reality. So how could Rebbe Elazar disagree with it? Let's read that again with the commentary inside. Undoubtedly, both the physical refining and the spiritual exaltedness of our holy ancestors greatly influenced their children and their children's children. The Rebbe Shlita says, on the comment of physical refining, in Egypt, our forefathers went through a process of physical refining while enslaved to work with the physical material of mortar and bricks. Commentator adds to the Rebbe Shita's comment, from an inner perspective, this represents the cultural refinement of first experiencing embitterment and recognizing the inevitable lack of satisfaction in a life of subjugation to material values, and then undergoing a release and revelation of spiritual values. Something that the Creator is pushing oh so hard right here, right now in this generation, to bring us to a breaking point of realizing the lack of fulfillment and richness and eternity that is in chasing and being ensconced in material pleasures and values, in contrast to the eternal ones of spirituality. To continue, the refinement remained with those of that generation that received the Torah, whose every member took upon himself or herself that sublime spiritual work, as each and every one stated wholeheartedly, We will do and we will hear. Asi v'nishma. The Rabbi Shlita says on this, the meaning of we will do is the preparedness to begin the work of and love your fellow as yourself without expectation of reward, solely on the basis of emunah, solely on the basis of faith in the greatness of God as well as the greatness of people. The meaning of we will hear is the comprehension of the worthiness of the work. It's not a condition for our service, but rather the trust that if we accept upon ourselves this difficult work between one person and another, and between a person and God, then we will see its worthiness in the end. It's all a matter of chashivut, of importance, realizing the greatness of the other being anything outside of oneself, being people and the Creator. The process of physical refinement and the choice of Israel takes place within each individual. For within each of us is the aspect of Yisrael, Yashar Kel, altruism, as well as the aspect of the nations of the world, which are the lusts for illicit relations, money, honor, etc. If the aspect of the nations of the world dominates a person, then he or she is not capable of accepting the Torah and is not at all interested in it whatsoever. That person may be capable of studying the Torah as intellectual wisdom, but he or she really has no connection to God's Torah, which is the Torah of loving the other. Only when we recognize our lack of true interest in the Torah and begin to pour out our heart in prayer on this issue, then God can gradually illuminate us by means of the light of the Torah. Then the aspect of Israel can slowly begin to hear the idea of fulfilling God's Torah. This reminds me of the Rebbe of Piazetzna, the Ish Kodesh. Very, very holy man, a leader of thousands upon thousands of Hasidim. He was the Rebbe of Piazetzna, after all, and he is famously known for works such as Chovat HaTalmidim, the obligations of the student, and he was known to strengthen those in the same concentration camp that he was in. And he did end up perishing in the Holocaust. Prior to those unfortunate events, he said in his book, Chovat HaTalmidim, he starts off the book with the notion of teach a child according to his way, which is Shlomo Melech, King Solomon. It is educating children 101, meaning to say, if we don't focus on the innermost part of the child, meaning their soul, and learn and understand how to unveil it and cultivate it, then we are suspect to being at fault if they look at the Torah as a wisdom, as opposed to a sweet, refining tool that brings us to the greatest pleasures of being connected to each other and the Creator. He calls it pedagogia, to say that even then, 100 years ago, that the Torah education had some focus, unfortunately, on the intellectual side and lacked the unveiling of the child's soul. So we see here again this idea of the difference between true Torah being the Torah of loving the other and refining oneself, and the Torah that is Torah, meaning just information. There is a lot of professors out there that are masters in the information of the Talmud. There are professors who are masters of the information of the Zohar. Just because they have the information within them does not mean that they themselves are refined, have any true authentic connection to the words in their utmost holiness, and therefore a connection to the Creator. In fact, some of them may even be atheists. So we are not to be experts seeking PhDs in the Talmud or the Zohar. as nice as that sounds. Rather, the priority is to slowly but surely work on ourselves and refine ourselves. So it's a matter of chashivut, of importance. It reminds me of a beautiful essay, a maimar, by the Rebbe Yitzchak, on the notion of make yourself a Rav, buy yourself a friend, and judge others favorably. I've heard many interpretations of make yourself a Rav, the most common ones being make yourself a rabbi, meaning take a rabbi upon yourself. Make yourself a Rav, meaning become learned enough that you can actually do Torah and mitzvot efficiently enough to properly refine yourself and to raise a Jewish family, so on and so forth. But here we see a deeper idea. Rav means great, large, big. And the ultimate Rav, the ultimate greatness, the ultimate teacher is the Creator. Make yourself a Rav means put the Creator up in importance. Make sure that your avodas Hashem, your inner work, is of the highest importance. How does one do that? Easier said than done. Buy yourself a friend is one way. General understanding, psychologically, makes sense. If I give someone a gift, they will like me more. Feel a closer connection. Something that bonds us. But here, to buy yourself a friend, more so acquire a friend, as the language in Hebrew is koneh, can also entail an exchange. Because I can acquire or buy something by bartering, by exchanging something. So the Rebbe Yitzchak says that to acquire a friend, the ultimate friend also is the Creator. And to acquire Him, we can exchange the parts of ourselves that don't serve us in connecting to Him. The aspects of our ego and the like that we can cut off and trade. Meaning, I'm going to sell, so to speak, these aspects of my ego and cut them off, and I'll use them and barter in order to gain the friendship of the Creator. Because the more I cut them and not make use of my will to receive for myself alone, in contrast to receiving in order to give, which is the highest level. Because receiving in itself is not unholy, it's not bad. It's receiving in order to receive for oneself, that is. But receiving, it can be altruistic too. So the more I cut off that receiving for myself alone, the more I can acquire a relationship with the Creator, so to speak. And then to judge others favorably is also a matter of the importance, as we mentioned here, the greatness of God and the greatness of people, and to have emunah in that. So to judge the other favorably, let's say if I see something not so great that someone is doing, first and foremost, I should interpret that as me seeing something in myself. The Rebbe Yitzchak says, the whole world was made for us. We have such an idea because we're all pieces of Adam Harishon, and the world was made for him. So technically speaking, it was made for us too, because we're pieces of him in terms of our soul. But a beautiful interpretation in terms of our inner work is that the whole world was made for me because every lack and every judgment I make of others and everything I see in the other is actually the Creator revealing that within my consciousness to notice something about myself. And if I dig and really want to work on myself and grow and to dig appropriately, I'll find it. I will find what I see in them actually being reflected in myself. And I can use that as a tool, meaning the whole world was made so that I can help refine myself too. Not to say that that's the only thing that others are good for. God forbid, of course, we should serve the other and see their importance and love them and give to them, so on and so forth. But in terms of this inner work, this point of judging the other favorably is to see the greatness of them, to see that holy point, to see the Creator's expression within them, being their soul. If we focus on that innermost point, says Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, then we can't be affected by their negative traits. If we focus on the good, we're fine. They won't have a negative influence on us. Interesting. But there's also an importance of surrounding ourselves with a proper circle, friends, communities, so on and so forth. So to judge others favorably doesn't necessarily mean to have an open door and open borders for having close friends. Surely we should greet everyone with a smile, be kind, be giving. But to build close relationships with others takes great sensitivity. And ideally, we should defer to a spiritual master, to a Rav, to a leader of ours, in order to consult whether or not such relationships with this person or that person is good for us. One can say, what, I can't make a decision for myself who to be friends with? Of course you can. But like anything in life, you have an opportunity to nullify your desire, thinking that we know better, and we can defer to someone that's greater than us, and therefore practice nullifying ourselves. And perhaps this person would have a much greater insight, and perhaps a spiritual X-ray greater than ours, and will be able to match and say what would be best for our development. As in theory, such a person would be very well versed in consulting others in their spiritual development, so on and so forth. Back to the Baal HaSulam, around page 109 in the middle. And this is the reason we were chosen, out of necessity, to be a treasured people from among all the nations. On the word necessity, the Rishita says, he states that we were chosen out of necessity because the other nations did not want the Torah at all. In terms of its inner meaning, this expresses that our egoistic desires, known as the other nations, within each individual, do not want to be subjugated to the Torah. When we say on Passover night a quote that we want the nations to be destroyed, we want our enemies to be destroyed, meaning they're trying to destroy us, so naturally want them destroyed. That's not a blanket statement against all nations of the world. God forbid. Nations of the world are also intrinsically holy, and because they're telling Elohim. So how do I interpret to destroy my enemies? My inner enemies, because the nations of the world are aspects of myself. So next Passover, when you say such things, it's a good thing to contemplate. Destroy the inner aspects that are keeping us and blocking us from connecting to the other. Friends, great people, Kadosh Baruch, the Creator. In terms of the treasured people, Rabbi Shita says, actually this is a comment by the commentator. The Hebrew word segula is used here to describe the Jewish people and is usually translated as treasured or specifically fit for its purpose. However, it also has a connotation of being a spiritual remedy. And this fits Baal HaSulam's theme that the people of Israel are destined to heal the world of its self-love. As he says in section 28, this means that you will be my treasure, in the sense that sparks of purification and cleansing of the body shall pass through you to all the peoples and nations of the world. The intention of cleansing the body is cleansing of the ego, which is considered the bodily portion of the soul. I did some gematria on Segula. I thought it was very interesting. I got creative here as I do with gematria, so bear with me. But the gematria of Segula, gematria, if you're unfamiliar, there's a numeric value attributed to every letter in the Torah. And there's also the atbash gematria, meaning every letter has an opposite corresponding value to it. So for example, Aleph is 1, Bet is 2. The atbash of Aleph is Tav, which is the opposite letter, 400. The opposite letter of Bet is Shin, which is 300. So the regular gematria of Segula is 104, which is the gematria of Dak. Dak is thin or specific. We even have the language here that it can be specifically fit for its purpose, or a specific remedy, a spiritual remedy. Because to be such a treasure is to be a specific remedy of this specific Torah of loving the other, the specific action of building a nation where this is the truth and this is actualized, so we can be an example and the big brother, so to speak, to the world. The atbash of Segula is 398, which is the gematria of Chavshi, which means free. What's the connection? if we were to be a segula, meaning we are to be the example, we're the treasure for the world. So we're supposed to actualize giving to give. We're supposed to actualize this altruistic utopian society for the rest of the world to take after. Meaning that all of us are free. Free, first and foremost, from our will to receive for ourselves alone, meaning it's not enslaving us, and then we can finally give infinitely to our society because everyone's taking care of themselves, meaning I don't have to worry about my own needs because I'm thinking about 100 other people, and I've got 100 people thinking about me. And also the freedom, meaning I can just give freely, and I want to be free and mevatel myself and nullify myself, and I'm free to give. 398 is also the gematria of Chamshim, which is a way to spell 50. 50 gates of Bina. I can't explain so much there because I'm not so well versed, but I know that 50 is generally speaking an allusion to Bina. There's also different numbers and different parameters, but 50 gates of Bina. Bina is the state of consciousness that passes their threshold past egoism. Bina is giving to give. So also hinted to here in Segula is this dynamic of being able to reach this high level. There's also a matter of taking the difference between the gematria and the atbash, as well as adding them together, which also we find some interesting things. If we take the difference between the atbash and the gematria, we get 294, which is our gaman, purple. Purple is, normally speaking, the most royal color, arguably. And we are the treasured nation to the king of all kings, but we're also his sons and daughters, meaning to say that we are to take after his qualities of giving and loving, of being a true righteous king, like the righteous kings of old, being David HaMelech and Shlomo HaMelech, who did not serve themselves, rather served their nation. So perhaps another allusion to this dynamic of being a segula. And last but not least, the last gematria with a couple ideas to it. If you add 104 and 398, you get 502, which is gematria basar, meat. But not meat in this sense. The deep idea behind basar is basar, with commander, meaning the Tsar of all, the commander of all, the prince of all, so to speak, is the creator. And the bet is the prefix meaning with him, in him. When we eat on Shabbat, we have a process generally by tradition of the food on the table. We go from fish, dag, to basar. Fish don't have limbs of their own, so to speak. They have fins, but they just go. They're swimming in the water, water being an allusion to chesed, to Torah, because the level of the fish is like giving to give. And basar is already the next level, where we can be within and actually enjoy and experience receiving in order to give with the Creator, which is why the meat comes after the fish, because that's already at the highest level. And I think it's interesting, the allusion between dag and basar, because dag is spelled dalad gimel, it's going from the fourth letter to the third letter, and then basar is bet, which is the second letter, and then sar is an allusion to the Creator, which is like aleph. So it kind of goes through the whole system from Dalet, Gimel, Bet, and Aleph. 502 is also the gematrias of Baruch Mordechai, as well as cursed is Haman. It says in the Gemara that if the Klal Yisrael does not do tshuva, then the Creator will appoint a king more wicked than Haman to force us to tshuva. Or if we do tshuva, then if we return to this ultimate quality that he exudes, then we won't have to deal with that suffering. And we can be like Mordechai, who, in the story of Megillah Esther, when he was offered all the pleasantries that had to do with being promoted by the king, he said no. He accepted nothing. He just wanted to give. By the end of it, he donned the royal garments and he was able to receive in order to give. So we should be like the blessed Mordechai, God willing. Last but not least, to finish off the Baal HaSulam's words with the last comment, hence, only the members of the Israeli nation were admitted into the required guarantee, and not the nations of the world at all, because they did not take part in it. This is the plain reality. So how could Rebbe Elazar disagree with it? The Rebbe Shita says on the spot, that is, Rebbe Elazar certainly accepts this truth, that in the initial stage, only Israel must occupy itself with this wondrous work of loving the other. His mention of the guarantee that applies to the whole world is due to his referring to the next stage. All he was referencing was the finale, so to speak, where everyone takes on the yoke of loving the other, as opposed to just Klal Yisrael. But again, of course, we are to be the example, we are to be first. As the next section's header reads, the Israeli nation must continue to train itself and others until the world adopts the spiritual work of the love of others. We should be zoche, we should be able to merit and refine ourselves speedily and soon to accomplish this. God willing. All the best. Till next time.